So this was a really fascinating complementary series of presentations. And the question I'm going to start with, in a sense, the answers are implicit in what each of you have said, but I'd like to draw them out. So I'd like you each, starting with Neil, if you would, and then down the line, to answer briefly these three questions. What is you can remember, they'll be easy. What is the development or use of GIS-type tools you're most excited about in the near term? What's the main barrier to that being between now and that being implemented? And what's the main trade-off you're concerned about? So the possibilities, what stands in the way of that possibility, and the main trade-off you're concerned about.
Well, I think the thing that's most exciting to me is the opportunity to make mapping affordable to all levels of society. You know, we've got used to the cost of mapping, the cost of flying aircraft, all this, and actually I think we can get it down by an order of a magnitude. What is costing us $200 or $100, I think we can get down to $5 or $10 in the next 5 years. And I think that's going to open up so many opportunities for countries that really want to have the same sort of resources that we've got used to in many of our own countries. Because I generally, you know, many countries that we work with haven't updated their base map for 20, 25 years. So I think that's a huge opportunity, and that's coming through taking the knowledge and using it to actually automate. And it's, you know, machine learning the machines don't learn on their own. They require us to teach them, you know, and in fact, you know, I think that's really then leads on to the next question. What does that mean we are really going to be focused on in the next 5 years? You know, if we press buttons and stand back and watch the machines work. And I think that's a societal challenge, you know, one that we haven't really come across. And I've gone through the early days of GPS. You know, I started with GPS back in 1983, and everybody told us that was going to put surveyors out of business, and it hasn't. It's just reformed our work. But I do think that it is a question about what are the capabilities we need as professionals? What do they really look like? And, you know, I think it's quite hard to look forward 5 years and say, this is where our added value is. So that's the bit that worries me as well, is what is our true added value? If you know, I've watched, you know, Rise of the Machines. It's worrying, isn't it? It's good movies, but...
And so to clarify that, in thinking about the barrier between right now and these dramatically more affordable maps, you think it's just the natural evolution of the next 5, or is there a specific thing?
I think it's a natural evolution. I think just what we can do in the last 18 months and 2 years is phenomenal. You know, in my 30 plus years, I've never seen it move so quickly. I mean, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, you know, I couldn't even imagine what we'd achieved, you know, 3 years ago to what we've actually achieved this year. It's phenomenal. And I think that's hard for us to operate in those timescales, you know, mapping people by nature. You know, when I first joined the Ordnance Survey, I had a 15-year production program. You know, wow, 15 years, we're going to map Britain, it takes 15 years. Now we're, you know, that just is an outrageous number. You know, we're talking weeks, months now, you know.
So for Boon Khai, so what are you excited about? What's the obstacle to getting there, and what are you concerned about?
In Singapore, we're trying to map our next frontier, which is underground. And no offense to Neil as a surveyor, the surveyors tell me you can't map what you can't see.
Yeah, okay.
But Jack says you should map what you can't see, or you know what you can't see. So we are actually looking at mapping underground, largely also because we're trying to free up more space above ground. We've spent the last 200 years, we inherited a system from the British. It's a very robust system of mapping above ground in terms of cadastral and so on. But really, the next is to define how you map underground, how you define the layers, how deep you go. In Singapore, we actually have legislation that says that an owner of above ground land owns no more than 30 meters underground. Because we believe that the potential with science, with technology going forward, allows many of us to go underground, whether it's purely for storage, for infrastructure, but really is to try to create the entire ecosystem below. What's the biggest challenge? Well, cost is still an issue, largely also because for many years, in fact, for the last number of decades, we have been digging, we've been putting things underground without properly identifying them, without properly geospatializing them. So now suddenly you realize that when you start to map and when you start to dig, you're hitting all sorts of things underground. And underground, just like above ground, it's not static. Things move underground. So it's a much harder challenge to figure out, what's underground than above ground. But we think that if you can get it right up to an exact science, obviously the potential is immense.
And just to follow up one question here, from a Singapore perspective, what is the main trade-off, peril, tragic imagination possibility you're concerned about with the rise of GIS tools?
Well, we think obviously the possibilities are infinite, limitless, but certainly from a government's perspective, data privacy is important. How do you engender that trust in a system? I have colleagues and friends who, after this, they're going to Medellin in Colombia, where they're attending a World City Summit, and one of the themes of that summit is how do you create not only just a smart city, smart nation, but a city or a smart nation which is based on high trust. There's a lot of trust that is, I think, eroding between governments as well as their citizens. How do you get back that trust so that governments can then plan long-term, invest in infrastructure and move forward rather than having to deal with all the other issues that come associated with trying to govern a country?
Thank you. So Rob, from your point of view, what you're most excited about, the main barrier to that, what you're most concerned about?
Well, I think the thing I'm most excited about is just being able to find correlations. And so letting the analysis show, go explore this. And having one of the barriers is having the time to do it and making dubious correlations. What's that old adage? I shot at the duck and missed in the front, and shot in the duck and missed in the back. On average, I killed the duck. So those are real scenarios. And then, in terms of, what are the scarce resources of time? And so, one of the things that I'm very thankful to our general manager and our board is that he's allowed us to actually bring analysts in-house. And so being able to have that data across departments and divisions where we're actually bringing it together, having those robust conversations, that then allows us to see these correlations and build on them. And that I'm very pleased about. And that's not just a local agency. That could be translated across an entire industry.
Yeah, thank you. So I'd like to start with Tan Boon Khai on this round, because you were mentioning the question of trust at the civic level, the national level. Some of the presentations we're going to hear this afternoon involve private organizations, private businesses, and what it took within those businesses to build support for the idea of investing in GIS and having people see that this could pay off. I'm curious, both within your own organization and in your surrounding society, what are some of the lessons you have learned about the process of building awareness, building trust? Within the Lands Authority, I assume you could just say, make this happen. And within Singapore, it's such a distinctive society. As the process of building trust in Singapore, are there any lessons from trust in Singapore that could be applied to societies that have 100 times more people and a comparable amount of more chaos than Singapore does?
I think engagement is key. I think the ability to be able to reach out, to be able to have views heard. Governments today are changing their mindsets about engagement. In the past, it's I do, you follow. Businesses probably might need to look at ways of engaging as well, rather than this is just good for the business per se. You probably need to look at whether it's good for the community as well, and it's not just good for one person, but really straddles across the different spectrums of community. In Singapore, there's a huge engagement going on now in really trying to tap views from society, trying to tap views from interest groups, trying to tap views from interested parties. And it's not an easy effort. It could be very laborious. It requires massive amounts of resources. My colleagues will tell you it consumes, sometimes it kills many of our ideas. But I think that's an evolution of how a society, especially how a democratic society will have to work. The question then is, where do you find the balance? Sometimes, and quite often, it's not a question of one solution for everybody or one solution that everybody's happy with. Sometimes it's really a question where you benefit the majority, in which case you probably have to spend some time explaining to the minority why it doesn't work for them. Hopefully, we can come back to revisit the issues. And public policy is all about this trade-off between what an educated society now expects and what the government believes.
So, Neil, will you describe from the Ordnance Survey and UK perspective the process of building support within the Ordnance Survey, a longstanding organization for this new technology, and in the surrounding society, the UK, like the US, like a number of other Western societies, having some crises of trust of public institutions and other institutions now. Describe the inside and the outside game of building support for what you're doing.
Wow. It's actually really quite challenging at the moment because the ecosystem we work in, especially in the UK, is a very large public service sector who very strong institutional departments, and I know you have that in the US, and so you do have the challenge to find bridges between different parts of policy, the delivery agencies, finding that environment that allows people to collaborate. And one of the things that the UK government has done is create a sort of a policy body called the Geospatial Commission to try to bring those communities together with a shared set of objectives. It's to really look at how geospatial enables, and I think that environment, which means that we're sort of having multilaterals for the first time, helps, so that there's conversations going on where the agencies are in the room and the policy departments are in the room, and we've never, bizarrely, ever had that before. We had lots of bilaterals. So I think conversation is critical. I think motivation is the interesting one for me. What's the motivation in terms of working more openly, working more collaboratively? And one motivation is challenges that we all have with budget cuts. And the other one is the level of investments that we need to make. And I think to be relevant, we've got to look across our estates and find ways of burden sharing. Because I think that's one of the challenges we've always had is that, and that's where sort of the open platforms, the data sharing platforms that Jack was talking about are so important. But it is a really hard time at the moment in the UK, and because of the situation we're in. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of financial, economic challenges, and you sort of, I don't think any of us expected to be there. So we're actually still trying to corral that because we've been part of a community with open borders for so long now. Even understanding how that might impact our society, even at things like data regulations, we're used to deploying, European regulations. Maybe we won't be doing that in the future. So we've got some pretty fundamental sort of things that we haven't really worked through yet. So I might sound a bit negative, but I don't mean to. It's just complex times.
And one follow-up there. In the U.S., which, like Britain, has a polarized national level politics now, technology has been able to advance in realms where it can escape being on the grid of national politics. But if it becomes on the grid of national politics, then it's a much different situation. For example, libraries basically are beyond national political dispute. Everybody likes them. But the Weather Service is getting in the middle of national politics now, and certainly the census has had that feeling. Have you been able to escape the grid of polarized national politics in the UK or not?
Not really, actually. In fact, we've probably become more focused because governments realise that sort of the highest level of value of geospatial, and this commission was set up by Theresa May in a Treasury announcement, and it was driven by a motivation to open more data to enable broader use, but also recognises the challenges that there needs to be a sustainable model of that. And so we've been trying to find that ground between the advocacy, which is strong and very compelling advocacy, that working open, making more data open, freely available, is a good outcome. But then you're passing the burden of the cost, essentially back to the taxpayer. Yeah. And so we're trying to find that mixed model. And I think we found it, actually. We're about to release the very detailed mapping data set you saw there as open data, but only up to a certain threshold of use, which means that utilities, sorry about that, yes, and the big platform providers will still pay. And actually, and yet the small innovation companies, the small sector businesses that want to find new ways won't. And that was driven by a policy statement, and we've really had to work very hard the last 2 years to work out how to operationalize that so that we can be around in 228 years,
So, Rob, the question for you is I have argued in print that local level U.S. government works much better than national level U.S. government does. Has your experience, how does your experience match that oversimplification?
It's It's situational, I would honestly say. Just thinking about the responses. So my two sides of my professional life. I was a consultant for almost 2 decades and now 2 years. Put your money where your mouth is and join the public sector. I was working for one of the largest cities in the U.S. As a consultant, and we were doing big data. The mayor was all about transparency, and they have a large international newspaper that went and looked at the data and used an average and came up with exactly the wrong conclusion. You are underserving a certain area of the city, which, by the way, correlates to underprivileged indigent folks, and so. But we were very, very quickly being able to use GIS to be able to show that's actually not the case. It's quite the opposite. In fact, the highest quantity of services are in those exact areas. Now, here's the reason why. And here are the issues from a local government perspective that those different departments can't work together. And now, being on the local agency, it's great. We can get in, we can do good work. The fact that we're not in a city as a special district means we transcend, and it's wonderful. But then the politics and the understanding really sets in. And so one of the challenges, and I know a couple of my colleagues in here can talk about, it's funny to say or odd to say, we're at times at odds with the state of California. What they want to do with our data, all of a sudden, instead of being someone that wants to share information for better decision making, we're not sure we want to do that. We want to withhold because we're not sure how they're going to use that against us. And that's an oddity to be in the situation.
And again, it is typical. It resembles every wave of technology innovation as its influence grows. It's not just about technology anymore. It's about everything else. Neil, let me start this round with you. Jack's opening presentation was about this accelerating cycle of co-creation and co-evolution, and hardware leading to software, leading to organizations, and all of it sort of cycling around. You discussed that too. What is an illustration of either the most surprising or the most interesting example of this co-creation you've seen in the Ordnance Survey or from your work?
I think the most exciting thing is the speed at which it's happened. I expected it to take longer, to the innovation energy, collaborative working. I expected it to take longer, and it hasn't. The teams, when you put motivated people in a room and you don't feed them, they do a really good job now. When you take, and the people that will be here tomorrow, the real guys and girls that really work hard on solving daily problems, when you actually put them together, it's amazingly creative. And I think we've denied that creativity, for too long by not collaborating as openly as we could. And that might be driven by certain patterns we all talk, I'm a procurer, I'm a supplier, I'm a customer, and if you stay in those patterns, you won't be creative because those patterns come with their own operating manual. So I think somehow just finding, and that's a part of, what I was trying to say earlier, is that finding a new way of working together which recognizes that this is a group of people that deliver real value to society. We have to change the way we connect and we work and break down those silos of, and it's hard when you're in government because, you have to put out public procurement for obvious reasons. But ultimately, those aren't designed for collaborative relationships. And so we are building new methods, even in Britain, where we can build, collaborative procurements, but we sort of have almost financing models that don't, or even procurement models that don't actually fit the way we need to work going forward. And that's really hard because, you're all trying to do the right thing by working in a certain way. But, I've just been impressed, frankly, by how fast people make things happen. We all had hackathons a few years ago and thought they were awesome and cool, but actually what we were doing is creating environments for creativity that could deliver outcomes in hours. And I think, agile working, development work, it shocks me how fast good people can produce really exciting answers really quickly.
So Tom and Khai, what's been the most interesting or surprising illustration of this co-evolution you've seen?
First and foremost, that the young pick up geospatial very fast, much faster than many of us. We've been trying to engage schools in Singapore to try to introduce and create awareness, but you'd be surprised how creative the young people can be. So it goes beyond just businesses working with the government and so on. We're trying to obviously develop as the Land Authority is responsible for developing the capability center for geospatial in Singapore, we're trying to look at developing the next generation of geospatial leaders. Where do we identify them? And they don't come with just a geography background. They come with all sorts of backgrounds. We believe actually that geospatial can now apply to every single person. It's only the extent, so there are different layers. You obviously have the users, you have the specialists, and obviously the technical experts. Each and every single of these layers requires probably a fundamentally different way of looking at how geospatial is collected and used. And we're trying to create that ecosystem so that it's self-sustaining as well. This big surprise for us actually is how much active the industry is. Probably less so in Asia, but certainly in the US, in Europe, in the Western Hemisphere. But we think that obviously it's going to come towards Asia at some point in time. There are certain ecosystems that are still developing. Some of the Southeast Asian countries are still quite at infancy. But we see a lot of exciting opportunities there to be able to come together as a whole, to either have consolidated maps, similar standards, similar frameworks, so that actually data sharing becomes almost seamless.
Rob, the most interesting illustration for you.
I'll just parrot, I will, in terms of just the correlations, the speed with which we are making decisions and being able to see those correlations and how well used it is. The city of LA used Waze data in order to solve sanitation issues. The city of Chicago had a rat problem. They were able to find correlations, and I wish I could remember what the factor was, but it was really that related to that, it did. And so predictive, and it's just amazing how this information is now available and we can look for those opportunities.
So we just have 2 minutes left here. I'm going to have a brief question for each of our panelists before I tell you the stage business for the afternoon. What half an hour from now, will you wish I had asked you?
Yeah. I wish you'd asked to buy me a beer. That would be nice. The thing that it goes again to this point about the purpose of what we do, and I think understanding, the role that geospatial has at the heart as part of a socially driven, capability. Yeah. That's so fundamental, and I think the reason that most of us are here, and I think, that to me that question is, and so what can we really do with that? Yeah. What is that new community that we can create that isn't, they're great companies, Facebook, and but there's a new community that we could create that is trusted, and I think trying to explore what that might be is really interesting.
I should explain the oddball premise for my question. Are there any French speakers here? I hope there are no French speakers here, so I can say this phrase in French, l'esprit de l'escalier, the spirit of the staircase, the idea that comes to you when you're on the staircase leaving an event, wishing you had thought of 15 minutes earlier. So this is the spirit of the staircase question. So for Tham and Khai, what we wish half an hour from now that I'd asked you and giving you a chance to say?
I would probably think that instead of an intelligent nervous system, and coming back, that it is an intelligent, robust system that we have. And I think we are just at the cusp of being able to achieve many more things of what it is. Nervous, I suppose, connotes many meanings, but really between the nervousness of the nervous system, but as I stood here, as I came up, I was terribly nervous. But once you're on stage, you figure out how to deal with nervousness, with conviction, with passion, and probably ultimately with a lot of dedication. So I think that's probably my ending remark.
Rob.
How do you allay the fears that many people have with information? Mm-hmm. And so, again, as a utility, we deal with a whole range of white collar to blue collar, and allowing people to be part of the solution and put that solution out there, and so that they can see where their job migrates is very powerful. And so it lays that fear. But that's going to be something we're facing, again, how quickly everything is changing. We're going to be faced with that repeatedly over the next decade.